The disappearance we're going to talk about is almost 73 years old, but it is just as baffling now as it was in 1951. How can a little girl disappear in a big crowd of people with no one seeing anything? Was it a case of stranger danger, or did someone she knew betray her trust? Let's talk about Beverly Rose Potts. Beverly Rose Potts was born on April 15, 1941 in Cleveland to parents Robert and Elizabeth Potts. She also had a sister, Anita, who was 22 years older. The Potts' youngest daughter was born 2 months premature and spent the first few weeks of her life in an incubator. Being so tiny with pink skin, Elizabeth Potts lovingly nicknamed her baby girl Rosebud. Before we get into the details of this case, I wanted to mention that I used a few old newspaper articles in my research, but took most of the information from the documentary called Dusk and Shadow: The Mystery of Beverly Potts. It features interviews with law enforcement as well as Beverly Potts' sister, Anita. It also has an in-depth interview with Jesse James Bedell. Bedell is a college professor and true crime writer who has written a book about Potts' disappearance titled Twilight of Innocence: The Disappearance of Beverly Potts. I highly recommend checking out the documentary or book for more detailed information on this case. Beverly Rose Potts was enjoying the end of summer. She would soon be entering the 5th grade and lived in a modest home on Lynette Avenue, just a few blocks from Halloran Park. It was an 11.5-acre park that opened in 1945 and was a popular area for the local townspeople. Beverly, however, was known to easily lose track of time while playing at the park. Just the day before her disappearance, she arrived home much later than she had been told to while playing with her cousin Amber. It was for this reason that Beverly Rose was grounded by her parents from going to the park. I do want to mention some facts about Halloran Park that I feel are important to note. The park was very dark at night and generally considered unsafe after hours. It hosted a vagrant community at dark and a lot of partying going on, with debris regularly left behind. Perhaps a valid reason of the danger of the night was the park actually had no lights in it. The only light was the nearby street lights, and they were often overshadowed by large trees. There were also some reports of molestation of 2 girls in May at the park, and a few sex attacks near the Potts residence, but the accounts of them are quite vague. It appears Halloran Park was the last place that a 10-year-old girl should be at night alone. It being the end of summer, a treat would soon be happening in Halloran Park. This was said to only happen once during the summer and is called a show wagon. It is basically a mobile traveling stage that is compared to a talent show with children being involved. Beverly had enjoyed it very much in past years, and for this reason, her mother agreed to suspend her grounding and let her go to the show wagon concert. The date it was to be in Halloran Park was August 24, 1951. Beverly Rose Potts was looking forward to the show and was told by her mother she could stay until the show was over that night. When that day arrived, Beverly planned to attend the concert with her friend and neighbor Patsy Swing. Patsy's parents arrived at the Potts home, and most of the family were going to watch a baseball game that night on the television. However, around 7 p.m., Beverly and Patsy left for the park on their bikes, only a few blocks from the Potts home. Not long after the girls arrived at the park, a large crowd was forming. Reports say as many as 2,000 people attended the event that night. The girls decided it would be difficult to navigate the area with their bikes, so they decided to bring their bikes home around 7:30 p.m. They did that and arrived back at the park to make it for the show, which was to start at 8 p.m. The next thing that is known for certain is that Patsy arrived back at her home at 8:55 p.m. Beverly, however, wasn't with her. Patsy expressed to her father that she was upset that Beverly didn't want to come back with her. What was unknown to Beverly's parents at the time was that Patsy had to be home by 9 p.m., whereas Beverly had permission to stay until the end of the concert, which reports state ended around 9:40 p.m. At 10 p.m. and no sign of Beverly, the family went out on foot and started frantically searching for their daughter. They phoned police, but accounts said it took 3 phone calls for them to actually arrive. Police arrived around 12:30 a.m. and began a thorough search of the Potts residence to no avail. Beverly Rose Potts was now missing. As you can imagine, Beverly's family was in a panic. By the next morning, there was a full-scale search. It was referred to at the time as the biggest search in Cleveland history. Thousands helped in the search, with city workers scouring parks, streams, and fields. At first, around 1,500 tips a day were called in, but nothing of them resulted in anything significant. There really seemed to be very little in sightings of Beverly during the actual show wagon event. Several people did report seeing a girl matching Beverly's description talking to 2 young men in a battered 1937 Dodge black coupe with a smoking, noisy muffler. No one saw the girl enter the car, however. An acquaintance of Beverly's, a 13-year-old boy named Fred Krause, claims he saw Beverly leaving the park around the same time hundreds of others were leaving. He believed it was Beverly because of her duck-like gait and rather distinctive walk. If it was Beverly he saw, she was walking towards the area of her home and would be there in just a few minutes. Another fact about Beverly that is widely reported is her extreme shyness, especially with men, as well as being very cautious towards strangers. It is thought highly unlikely that she would willingly go with a man she didn't know. Given the last time Beverly was seen was in a large crowd of people and no one saw any type of a struggle or any screams, there is speculation perhaps Beverly was abducted by a woman or someone she knew. Beverly was already doing some babysitting jobs, and she could have been lured to go with someone with the promise of a job or asking her to run an errand. I also want to report on the uneasy relationship between Beverly's family and the press during the disappearance. In the documentary, it states that reporters were intrusive at the Potts home and were eventually asked to leave. There were many strangers and reporters camped outside their home for the first 2 weeks, but appeared more as spectators than having a general concern to what the family was going through. The family, for that reason, did not want to talk to the media, stating they had no regard for their family. The unwanted attention from all directions the Potts family received was terrible, and it was compared to a carnival midway. Police would have to have the Potts mail rerouted to them so they could filter all the harassing mail out in order to shield the family. Law enforcement also eventually decided to only contact the family for important things and not update them on every aspect of the investigation. They would also only contact them after dark so as to limit the attention this already devastated family had to endure. The family all did take lie detector tests and were quickly ruled out as having anything to do with the disappearance. Police determined Beverly had a good home life and would have no reason to leave on her own. As the search continued for Beverly, there was a report that police did take seriously. 10 days after the disappearance, a factory worker taking a break near the Cuyahoga River saw a 5-foot-long bundle floating. He said it resembled a body. Several others reporting seeing the bundle as well. The man phoned police right away, and the river was dragged and divers were employed, but the bundle was gone and is said likely to have floated into Lake Erie. Police were continuing to do everything they could to try to find Beverly. When school started, they even interviewed Beverly's classmates, but nothing significant came of that. About 3 weeks after Beverly disappeared, police conducted an attic-to-basement search of all homes on Lynette Avenue, but once again, it was fruitless. In addition to some compelling suspects, this case seemed to have an abundance of people who would take credit for the crime and then later recant, or who were found to have been lying. This only served to devastate the family further and waste law enforcement resources. I will detail some of them. After having experienced countless prank phone calls, the Potts were forced to disconnect their phone. In early November of 1951, Robert Potts received a call at his work with someone demanding to know why his home number wasn't working. He said he had a ransom demand, but only if their home number was reinstated. After it was reinstated, the caller said Beverly was still alive, but very sick, and demanded $25,000 for her return. He insisted that Beverly's mother, Elizabeth Potts, bring the money. A detective dressed like Elizabeth went to meet the possible kidnapper, but sensing a trap, the man fled. The detective chased and captured him. The ransom caller was named Frank Dale Davis and was said to not be involved in the kidnapping, but needed cash to pay off debts. He was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Another very bizarre encounter took place in late November of 1951. A man named Tom phoned Beverly's friend Patsy's father, Lester Swing, and claimed he had Beverly. He said he hit her with his car in August. He thought she was dead and put her in his car, but she was just stunned and had amnesia. He said he would release Beverly in downtown Cleveland only if Lester dressed Patsy in the same clothes as Beverly was last seen in and stood her by the magazine stand at the May Company department store. Police used a decoy, and Tom didn't like it. The caller rescheduled for 2 weeks later, and Patsy was used this time. They were able to catch the caller, who was Stephen Tocodi. He was cleared of any involvement in the actual disappearance, and it is unknown why he made the phone calls. In 1955, Harvey Lee Rush, a drifter and Cleveland native, caught police's attention after an arrest in Los Angeles for public intoxication. According to his official 3-page confession, Rush said he murdered a girl in his home city that he met at a puppet event. He claimed the girl was 12 years old, had glasses, and that he killed her in 1952. However, Beverly disappeared in 1951. He later recanted his confession, saying he only confessed to get extradited back to his hometown. In 1973, there was a report that Beverly's body was buried in the basement of what was then an auto body shop. It was searched, but nothing significant was found. In 1994, a letter was discovered under the carpet of a Cleveland house from a woman who said she caught her husband disposing of Beverly's body in the furnace. The woman was tracked down and said it was false. She had written it as a revenge fantasy against her abusive husband. In 1980, 2 retired Cleveland detectives, James First and Robert Shanklin, revealed that in 1974 they received a tip from a local attorney. This attorney said a client of his revealed his brother confessed to abducting Potts. Detectives did a 3-month-long investigation, even interviewing the client's brother. The man readily admitted to living near Halloran Park in 1951. He said he had a habit of picking up and molesting children there, but didn't remember abducting Beverly in particular. He said he had flashes of memory involving someone named Beverly. The detectives were convinced this man was guilty, but the prosecutor's office wouldn't pursue charges in the case due to lack of evidence. Another man questioned was William Henry Redmond, an Ohio native and former carnival worker, who was indicted for the 1951 murder of 8-year-old Jane Marie Altoff. In prison, Redmond was said to have told his cellmate that he killed 3 other young girls. When questioned about the Potts case by authorities, Redmond wouldn't make a statement either way. He was in the general area at the time and had a record of child molestations dating back several years. There were also 4 letters sent to Brent Larkin of the Cleveland Plain Dealer in 2000. They were said to be from a sick elderly man who wanted to confess to molesting and murdering Potts before he died, stating, "50 years is long enough to live with what I've done." He pledged to turn himself in at Halloran Park on August 24, 2001, the 50th anniversary of her disappearance. He said he would send the reporter a sealed brown envelope upon his death that included most of the details of the death, including a rare coin Beverly had in her change purse at the time of her abduction. However, shortly before the anniversary, the reporter received a final letter stating the writer had to go into a nursing home and would be unable to turn himself in. The writer's identity was never discovered, and it is now believed to be a cruel hoax. So sadly, all of the leads and confessions at the end of the day didn't further the case at all. Beverly's family went through such torment between the not knowing, the cruel calls, and false confessions. In some ways, Beverly's mother, Elizabeth, died the day her younger daughter went missing. According to her daughter, Anita, Elizabeth was devastated and started heavily drinking and died of cirrhosis of the liver just 5 years after her daughter's disappearance. Beverly's father would die in 1970, and her sister Anita would continue to try to find answers for her sister's disappearance until her death from cancer in 2006. Anita's daughter said that Beverly's disappearance definitely affected her mother's parenting and always needing to know exactly where her children were. She didn't like to talk about her sister Beverly's disappearance due to how painful it was, and would only say that she had a sister that disappeared. There is a remembrance headstone for Beverly near her parents' grave, but sadly it is empty. As far as my thoughts on Beverly Rose Potts, I definitely think she was abducted that day. I don't necessarily think she knew her abductor. If you can imagine the scene that night, it was dark, maybe even pitch dark, and if there were upwards of 2,000 people there, it would have been chaotic and probably pretty loud. I think her abductor probably had a car and perhaps just abruptly took Beverly and put her inside of it before she had a chance to yell. Besides, if anyone did hear anything like a scream and looked around, there is a good chance they couldn't have even seen what was happening. Beverly Rose will always remain a beautiful 10-year-old girl, her youth frozen in time, her disappearance quite possibly forever a mystery. Such a tragic case with so many unanswered questions. Beverly was within a few minutes of arriving at her home before she seemingly encountered Peril in the park. I wanted to briefly mention another case that happened not long after Beverly's disappearance. These two cases may have a connection, which I will talk about in a minute. Constance Smith, nicknamed Connie, was 10 years old. She lived in Wyoming, and her grandfather, Nels Smith, was a former governor of that state. Connie was spending part of the summer of 1952 at Camp Sloan in Salisbury, Connecticut. The details of the incident are strangely vague, but it is said that she had an altercation with a group of female campers on the morning of July 16, 1952, and apparently Connie had suffered a bloody nose during the incident. Soon after, Connie told that her tent mates she was skipping breakfast and walking to the camp dispensary where she was going to return an ice pack she'd used the night before. Apparently the ice pack was used when Connie fell out of her tent and bruised her hip. However, despite what she told her friends, she left her ice pack behind and didn't go to the dispensary. Instead, Connie walked away from the camp and down Indian Mountain Road. Several neighbors near the camp saw Connie walking that morning. Mrs. William Walsh answered a knock on her door, and it was apparently Connie. She looked like she'd been crying and asked if she could tell her the way to Lakeville, Connecticut, which was only about half of a mile from Camp Sloan. Another couple that lived by the camp watched Connie walk down the road that day. However, since Connie was said to be tall for her age and looked much older than 10 years old, they thought perhaps she was a counselor. In all, there were thought to be 9 different people who saw Connie walking, and some even actually saw her hitchhiking that morning within the 2 miles to Route 44. After the fact, they all felt terrible that they didn't offer help once they learned how young the girl was and that she had gone missing. As far as why she would be trying to get a ride, Connie was said to be homesick, and with only a week left of camp, it is thought that she probably decided to hitchhike. Connie's parents were divorced but lived in neighboring ranches in Wyoming. The main problem with hitchhiking is, of course, it is very dangerous. Besides that, Connie lived in Sundance, Wyoming, which is over 1,800 miles from the summer camp in Connecticut. Sadly, it appears that any legitimate sightings of Connie would end soon after she hit Route 44. The camp noticed that Connie was missing that afternoon when they noticed the ice pack was still in her tent. There was an extensive search by the camp. When Connie's parents were alerted to her disappearance, there was of course another full-scale search said to have spanned 9 states. Her father even chartered a plane, and there was an air-sea rescue craft utilized from the Westover Air Force Base. The only thing that authorities seemed confident in was that Connie Smith was seen thumbing a ride on Route 44, which was about 1.5 miles from the camp. In an article from 1957, police repeatedly questioned a man named George Davies, who had served prison time for molesting 2 girls in his hometown. He was to stand trial for murdering 2 young girls who resisted his advances that he had confessed to. He adamantly denied ever knowing Connie Smith, and there was no evidence that he had anything to do with her disappearance. However, I did find a newspaper article in 1959 saying that Davies did confess and led authorities to where he said he buried Connie, but no remains were found. It also mentioned that numerous people had called police over the 8 years that she had been missing, claiming they'd murdered Connie or knew where she could be found. The reason I decided to include this disappearance in the podcast is another suspect that's frequently mentioned in Connie's disappearance. The same person is also mentioned in Beverly's disappearance, and that is William Henry Redmond. Redmond was a former carnival worker who was charged with the murder of 8-year-old Jane Marie Altoff, whose body was found at a Pennsylvania carnival. Redmond was eventually tied to the scene when his fingerprint was found in the truck where Altoff's body was found. He was officially charged in 1988 with the murder, but was deemed too ill to stand trial and died in 1992. Redmond is reported to have confessed to a cellmate that he had killed 4 girls in his lifetime. It is thought Redmond could have worked in a carnival in Lakeville around the time of Connie's disappearance. He is said to have passed a polygraph concerning Connie Smith, and there was no actual evidence to implicate him. As far as my thoughts on Connie Smith, I do find it strange the events that happened that morning at the camp. Was Connie attacked by a group of other girls? It was apparently violent, as Connie was said to be injured. I wish there were more answers as to what actually happened, as apparently it was bad enough for Connie to leave on foot a few hours later. With all the seemingly legitimate sightings of Connie hitchhiking, I do think she was picked up by someone that day and probably soon after met with foul play. So that concludes the podcast on Beverly Potts and Connie Smith. If you liked it, please leave a rating or review where you listen to your podcasts. You can find me on Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. You can also find all of my articles, as well as links to my most recent podcasts, at my website at Lost and Found Blogs. You can reach me by email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.